I'm going to share my screen really quick. Sorry, let me get to the beginning of the presentation. Awesome. So can everyone see my screen? Okay, so my name is Danielle Hoague, and I will be presenting today about activism in academia and what it means to be a PhD researcher of environmental justice issues. Quick, let me get started. A little bit about me. So I'm from Altadena, California, so I may be from near, or I grew up near where some of you may be. I'm currently in Central Europe, so I'm about 9 hours ahead. I am a second-year PhD student at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. And in my free time, I enjoy plants and crocheting. These are pictures of some of my plants. I also enjoy spending time outside. Here's a picture of me jumping in Alabama hills. So before I was a PhD student, I was a community college student. So I'm really, really passionate about encouraging community college students to transfer and pursue higher education. So I went to Pasadena City College, and I was there for 2 years. I was a student of art, and it was something that I really enjoyed at the time. I barely graduated high school, and that was why it was my first option, and honestly, I would do it all over again because I was able to save so much money. It allowed me to stay at home, and I learned so much from students who were working, student parents, and saw a lot of students of color like myself. And after 2 years, I transferred to the University of California, Berkeley, and I was still studying art, but realized that I really did not like the art department and wanted to switch over to the environmental sciences, but I definitely had a lot of anxiety about my abilities in math and science, so it took me a while to get there. And I became involved in independent research and eventually switched over to the College of Natural Resources, and I was able to apply to the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. And it has been quite a journey. It's only my second year, and I really enjoy what I'm studying. I'm really passionate about environmental justice, so it's really the perfect fit for me. And in about 4 years, I will be a professor, so I'm really excited about that. So why I became interested in this issue is because I grew up close to a contamination site. So my house is right over there outside of the shot, and I hadn't heard the term environmental justice until my first year at UC Berkeley, despite that this was an issue that I'd grown up with and that I was a little familiar with, but the information that was being disseminated about this issue was sparse and far between. So a brief timeline of what happened. So that's NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And in the 1940s and 50s, they dumped rocket fuel into the Arroyo Seco. And this was a major source, or a major contaminant, and contained volatile organic chemicals that were detected in the wells in the 1980s. So despite that there was knowledge of the disposal or maldisposal practices, about 40 to 50 years earlier, it took the city of Pasadena contacting the lab to ask if there was anything wrong, and they denied any kind of dumping. So in 1992, the water was still being distributed, and the US EPA came in and declared it a Superfund site, which means that it's on the National Priority Cleanup List. And in 1997, 34 residents with Hodgkin's disease sued JPL, and NASA still denied the dumping at this time. They actually came out in a statement for the LA Times that there were no chemical linkages between Hodgkin's disease and rocket fuel propellants, which seems like a pretty obvious issue, that there would be some kind of bodily harm caused by the volatile organic chemicals. But because of the political aspects and legal aspects, they kind of muddled the information, which caused harm to hundreds of Black families. And here I put not an illustration, but this is a picture of their current efforts at the laboratory where they're building aircraft. And on the right, we have a picture of the wells that are in Pasadena. And I really like this juxtaposition because we have the new and we have the old. And the old infrastructure is what we tend to use in our everyday lives that we don't really have to think about. While we have hundreds of scientists and thousands of people working on these innovations that are for the good of society, but we're not taking care of people as they need to be taken care of. So this leads me to my research question. How do we sociopolitically make meaning of environmental contamination? And I find this really interesting because contaminants are something physical that we study in laboratories. However, the implications of these contaminants can wreak havoc on communities. So how they're experienced in the body can only be told through storytelling. And that's something that we don't often see in scientific research. So the goal of my PhD is to frame the political exchange between scientific knowledge making and community activism. So here I inserted an illustration that was done by Ricardo Levins, and it's about how environmentalism really has the ability to impact policy, and it's an act of defiance against mainstream environmentalism and how it doesn't serve the most vulnerable. So we often see this in climate change action where these new innovations, sustainable technologies, new green infrastructure is not necessarily built to help the people that need it the most. So there are a lot of environmental justice issues in LA, and I'm currently measuring the cumulative effects of lead poisoning, and this is at schools, at parks, and at residences, because individually, or the state of California's guidelines for lead and a threshold is pretty low, but there is no safe amount of lead. And for kids who are in lead contaminated areas, they're getting different exposures at school, at the places where they play, as well as in their homes. And this can lead to different defiant behaviors, but behaviors that are not conducive to doing well in school, and ultimately lead to criminalization of these communities that are Black and brown. And I'm doing this project with a community partner, as well as with my partner at UCLA, who is Naomi Adams. They're really, really, really cool. You should check them out. I can link their UCLA website if you're interested. And so for some definitions, I study environmental racism and justice. The reason that I use both of these is because in order to achieve environmental justice, we have to look at environmental racism and call it out as it is. So by these principles, people who are disproportionately affected by climate change are Black and brown people who are in communities that are historically underserved. And environmental justice looks at the deliberate choices of these corporations and policy decisions by policymakers who are not necessarily connected to the histories of these places, and just disproportionately distribute environmental goods and environmental bads in different neighborhoods. So an environmental good could look like a green space, a health facility, and environmental bads could be distributed through different zoning laws, regional environmental policies, and different things like that. And I also study science and technology studies, and this is how we construct knowledge. So here I'm looking at the construction of scientific knowledge and how we think about science and technology and what that means for people who are left behind. So stories are what make meaningful data that we can actually use in policies, because it should be useful data that serves, it should be useful data. Otherwise, I don't know why we would be conducting all of this research. And it can be really dangerous because it could undermine community knowledge, activism, and policy health or positive health outcomes. And we see this a lot with Indigenous knowledge. And it's really important. So I put a GIF. I don't know if it's GIF or GIF. People say it different ways. I don't know, fight me. And I'll explain what this looks like in a PhD program, specifically the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability is an interdisciplinary program. So I do have a lot more freedom than most PhD students. It has its positives, it has its negatives, just like any other academic program. And they do tend to take more of a corporate sustainability approach, and I'm kind of in the middle where I really think that there's room for collaboration, especially with communities. So academic research is primarily theory-based. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of speculation, but it can be action-based. And this looks like having partners who are informing research and really have an active role in forming outcomes that can be used in, I shouldn't say the real world, because everything is real world. Everyone who's producing knowledge is doing their thing, but yeah. And this can look like local action. So my goal is not to treat communities like they're broken, but instead amplify voices that are already existing. So what are some tools that we would use? So in the project that for the project that I'm participating in right now, about the effects of lead contamination, we have people working in labs, and they're people who I'm really grateful for, people I'm really close to, but unfortunately that is not my forte. I studied art and then switched over. So I'm more on the writing aspect of things, communicating with different groups, and organizing. We also use different tools in order to point our efforts. Here I have CalEnviroScreen, which is comprised of publicly available data. This is why it's really important to fill out the census. The last time that this was updated was in 2018. So here we have individual indicator maps. We have overall pollution burden, which layers all of these other indicators. So we have ozone, particulate matter 2.5, diesel particulate matter, drinking water, pesticides, toxic releases, traffic, cleanups, groundwater, hazardous waste. The list goes on. This isn't even all of them. So for pollution burden, we can see that the darkest areas are the most affected by all of these indicators. And when it's overlaid with population characteristics, it's the same areas. So we have health out. This maps out health outcomes on top of pollution burden. So we have asthma, cardiovascular disease, low birth weight, education, housing burdens, linguistic isolation, poverty, and unemployment. And having this hypervigilance and stress every day of experiencing a degraded environment leads to these outcomes, and ultimately feeds into a system of oppression, because the vulnerability sought out, or the vulnerable aspects of these communities can be sought out and used to the advantage of different political projects. And the really cool thing about CalEnviroScreen is that it layers all of these things and puts them in order, or layers all of these indicators and puts them in different percentiles. So here we can see that the Central Valley is very heavily impacted. It is majority made of Latinx communities, migrant farm workers who are politically disenfranchised and lack political power. So these aspects are really important because we're rapidly seeing the effects of climate change and natural disasters. However, natural disasters are not natural. They're caused by anthropogenic climate change, and even the term climate change should be changed to global warming. It sounds like we're going to go through cycles, which we are. We probably won't live to see the next, sorry. But yeah, the planet's warming. So we're seeing some of these aspects play out in the COVID-19 pandemic. So in Los Angeles County, we've had 262,000 cases, a little over, and a disproportionate amount of deaths. So the share of the population is 1 in every 38 people having the disease, and 1 in 1,568 people. However, so the chances of dying from COVID-19 in Los Angeles County is 2.44%, which obviously is too high. We shouldn't be in this predicament. But in Imperial County, that is majority comprised of migrant farm workers, and Latinx communities people there have a higher chance of dying from COVID-19. So that's 0.26% higher chance of morbidity. So on top of all of these pollution burdens, we also have this aspect of, sorry, I'm like kind of stumbling over words, but we have this other body of oppression weighing on top of that. And these already vulnerable communities can't necessarily fight back, and we need these resilient structures, and we already have resilient structures within different facets of society, like we saw yesterday with Book Corn and Beautiful. So it's not necessarily to say that communities are broken or that they always need the help of academics, but we all do have a responsibility to amplify the voices that are often not heard. So why is understanding these relationships so important? So we need partnerships for better policy outcomes. And we're doing this because we need better systems of accountability. And that's for ourselves, that's for our families, for our communities, for our governments. And we really need diversity to address diverse problems. And this is really important, especially at the community college level, because so many students of color are able to access these public spaces, and we need more people transferring and really being involved. And we also have people who can facilitate that. There are scholarships, there are different ways to get involved in education. It's just that they're not always attainable. And protecting the earth is about protecting us all. Oh. What happened to my, so some important next steps could be getting involved in local action, doing anti-racist work, staying involved, like I said, staying in school. Sorry, I skipped ahead on a slide. And here's my last meme. This is fine, but always remember, it's not fine. We can do more, but first and foremost, take care of yourselves, and we do what we can. So thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, if anyone has questions, you can feel free to chat them, or we have a pretty small group today. You're also welcome to unmute yourself if you have any questions.
Let me stop share.
Cool, yeah. Feel free to participate in the discussion. I have some questions for you, Danielle, so let me pull those up right now. All right, let's get started. So Danielle, I know you've kind of, oh, actually we have a question. Let's start with the question in the chat. Oh, yes, Aris has, this is something we talk about a lot. He says, thank you for calling out that we need to stop using the phrase climate change. We talk about this a lot and how we need to refer to it as the climate crisis and the origin of like the term climate change, as you said earlier, has such an interesting socio-political context. I think Aris was saying the other day that it was a term that was invented by the Bush administration to kind of, yeah, anyway, so thank you for calling that out. Super important. But the question that I was gonna ask is how you've kind of approached starting relationships with, like, say the community that you're starting to work with for your research. You're someone who's coming from an institution, and I think there's sort of like a historical and like righteous distrust of institutions coming in sometimes to do work. You kind of brought up the narrative of trying to make sure that communities aren't like treated as broken. So can I ask how you build that kind of trust? Because these are such sensitive, like historical issues and that kind of thing. I'm just wondering what your experience has been with that so far.
Yeah, so I'm a part of the Center for Diverse Leadership in Science, and it's a really tight network of students of color who are interested in environmental issues. So I was able to connect with the Watts Community Labor Action Committee, it's kind of a confusing name, through Naomi, and building that relationship with the community has been pretty difficult, and I'm not really going to say anything more about the project because it's not really my story to tell at this time. And too often we have cases where citizen science is very collected. Citizen science has made very valid documentation of contamination, but it's not taken seriously until it's backed by institutions. So really respecting what the community has already done and acknowledging that it is valid and that we're here to support and amplify their voice is key. So as someone who's doing environmental justice work, the community comes first for me. I do have to write papers and stay up to date with what I'm doing in my program, but if the community doesn't agree with what I'm going to put out, I won't work on it or say anything about it or disclose any information that they don't feel comfortable with. So there's a lot of literature about this, but even the literature is not necessarily stepping into the lived experiences of people. And yeah, I'm also part of a different program that's through the National Science Foundation. It's called the Innovations at the Nexus of Food, Energy, and Water Systems. And it's so interesting to see that it's just such a different sphere of students, because we have primarily engineering students in this program who are very much on that like innovations track. And I always feel like I'm doing damage control. So yeah, it's just, there are just so many different moving parts of research that's like hard to keep up, but having that like kind of grounding aspect of like working with people who may need support, I feel is like a lot more fulfilling for personal reasons. And also I would not feel comfortable graduating from this program knowing that like it was just for me to get a job after.
Awesome, thanks. Great answer. So if we have students who are interested in pursuing a path similar to this, I mean, you definitely talked about how diversity is important and getting more people sort of on this path would be great because we definitely need more voices. What would you tell someone who's starting out and is maybe a CC student right now? Are there skills that I mean, obviously you came in as an art student, but is there anything that you've found kind of helpful? Are there like any tools or, you know, what kind of helped you get to this path of becoming a PhD student? I don't know if you could talk about some of the scholarship resources you also were able to take advantage of, like anything at all in terms of tools that are available for students kind of starting off.
Yeah, I would suggest getting involved in research. There aren't as many, or I noticed when I was in community college that there weren't as many opportunities, but also I was interested in art, so that wasn't really something I could do, like working in a lab or connecting with professors who are more in the environmental sciences field. But pursuing independent research really is the key aspect of proving that you can do work in a PhD program, because most of the work is on your own, which is a blessing and a curse, because it can be very isolating. For transferring, getting GEs done and making sure that you're on track for the UC system or wherever you want to transfer is like really important, but it is such an opaque process. And I didn't really have anyone who had gone through this process before me. So I definitely bugged the college counselor. And I was really lucky to have that person. And entering a large institution can be very overwhelming, and definitely trying to keep your cool, not get overwhelmed, and also understand that a lot of people have no idea what they're talking about is really important, because in academia people tend to like use lofty words and be fancy, but at the end of the day we all are the same. So that was something that I really had to overcome, especially as a student of color entering a predominantly white institution. It was very different than community college where you see other students who look like you. Yeah, and sorry, I forgot the last part of the question. I don't know if I completely answered or fully answered it.
Sorry, I had to get to the mute button. I was just asking about general resources, but I was wondering, could you talk about the scholarship programs that you're in? Are they geared towards students of color who are trying to pursue PhD research? I know you're a fellow for a couple of different things. If you can tell us a little bit about those, that would be really cool.
Sure, yeah. So one important resource that I forgot to mention is the McNair Scholars Program, and this is across I think it's across all of the UC institutions, and it's for first-gen, low-income students of color, and it was really like life-changing for me. Like I would not be in this program without the support system. You're given, I think it was like $5,000 to like kind of aid your time applying to grad.
You're cutting out a little bit, Danielle.
If you do decide to go that track. When I was in community college, I applied for FAFSA, as well as a few other scholarships. I don't exactly remember, but there are so many scholarships out there for like literally anything. And there were a lot of choices that I had to make as to whether or not I agreed with what an organization was doing and if I felt comfortable taking money from them. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind. And yeah, after I got to UCLA, connecting myself with the Center for Diverse Leadership in Science was really important. And I would suggest if you're at one of the community colleges to seek out organizations that are also interested in what you're doing. Because more often than not, there are people who have resources for you. So you don't have to seek them out yourself because that can be very difficult. And through CDLS, I am an early career fellow and I'm able to work with the Environmental Justice Working Group. And together we work with WATTS as well as other organizations, and we do clothing drives, clothing swaps, just generally hang out and talk about what we're interested or current issues in environmental justice. And yeah, so they're able to provide fellowships, and I'm also a part of the National Science Foundation Infuse program, and I work on food, energy, and water systems. This program was not exactly geared for me. It's more for STEM students, and they were looking for social science students who are familiar with the topics. And it's been a learning curve. It's also been like a huge learning experience, and it's been an integral part of my PhD. And I would suggest, if you're interested in applying for grad school, to do the research as to who will pay you to go to school versus who you're going to pay to go to school, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, because it is going to have long-lasting effects. So entering a PhD program, it should be fully funded, and seeking out fellowships that will also pay you to go to school is really important, so that you can be comfortable and also just really do well in your program or wherever you choose to go. And yeah, I think I have one last resource. I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but generally it's good to look at the path of whoever you would like to emulate, or what kind of profession you want to have after. Like sometimes I peruse like different CVs of professors and figure out like what conferences they've been to, who they're connected with. And I really don't like how people say networking constantly, because I don't like to exploit myself for purposes of getting ahead, or exploit other people. Well, I should say exploiting other people for their resources. So yeah, there are just so many things that I feel like you have to be kind of on top of. But yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, or if you have other questions.
No, yeah, that was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. So you're like a rising PhD student at UCLA. Super cool. How can people keep up with the research and the work that you're doing? Do you suggest just going on like the UCLA IOES website? Are there other events or anything that you're going to be presenting at? I know that you work on a show too. Like, what if our students are super, super interested in what you do and kind of would like to follow along with what you do?
Yeah, I if you look me up, just Danielle Hoague, IOES, my website should come up. And that's really all I have right now. I am on social media. I need to get on Twitter because I like to post a lot of resources that people can access pretty easily. But I do that primarily through just like different social media accounts or social media takeovers, which is how I met Chloe. And yeah, I can link that account as well as just what I'm up to. I'll post it on there. And I will be on the show Sustaining Us. And it's an issue about climate activism. I talk about environmental racism. The producers haven't given me an exact date as to when it's airing, but if you go on my Twitter, I will post it. I think, yeah, it's really cool.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Danielle. Super appreciate you talking about your work today and always working with us. It's super fun to get to talk to you and hear about all the amazing work you're doing and where you're starting at. I think it's going to be really cool to see all the different places you go. That's going to be pretty much it for a presentation today. I'm going to stop the recording, but people are welcome to stick around for a few minutes if you want to just casually chat at all. Danielle, if you have to go, that's fine. But if you want to stick around at all, that's also cool. But yeah, thanks everyone.